Clear prop.
Star 73, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Sutton. 1 Charlie Bravo, exited in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby. How are you?
I am fantastic as always. Been a few weeks. We had a guest on a couple weeks ago, and we're going to now share Mock Checkride Private Part 3 with all you listeners. Hopefully these will be shows we'll get to share with people for years to come, Wally, to really guide you through the process of what that checkride is going to be like, using the ACS as our guide to walk you through what you should expect. It's an open book test. And too many times I think I see flight students not being prepared. I'm sure Wally's seen students come and not even know what the ACS is. So take heed to these 3 episodes and make sure you're a good student and a good applicant when you meet your DPE. We were through everything through Area of Operations 1 and 2 before this episode. We kind of were doing the taxi and the takeoff kind of stuff when we wrapped up episode 2 or part 2 of this series. And now we're at Area Operation 3, communications, light signals, and runway light systems for Task A. Wally, I can remember memorizing the light gun signals, so I was so afraid my instructor or my DPE was going to ask me, what does flashing green mean? What does red, green mean? Do you conduct your questioning like that?
I do. Well, no. I when we get the light signals, it's within the context of an electrical failure. And I'm just going to throw it out there. I mean, I lob a softball. I will say, you're coming in to land, you get a green light. What does that mean? And I remember as a young student, I remember my instructor asking me, what does a red light and a flashing orange light mean? And I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know this. I've never heard of flashing orange. He said, it means the Coke machine is out of Coke and use exact change only.
These kids will know what you're talking about, but that brought back many memories for me.
I know. That's what I was just thinking. As I started to tell that little story, I thought, people aren't going to know what does that mean, exact change only.
So when you couldn't use your iPhone to buy a soda, we used to have to put coins into the machine, and if the orange light was flashing and the Coke cost 55 cents, you had to have 2 quarters and a nickel, or you were going to lose the extra change you put in to get that soft drink out of the machine. Right.
And this was before you could even put dollar bills in. Remember, you had to go somewhere to get the change to get the coins. Before we even really jump into this, I just want to go back and just reiterate something about Area of Operation 2. Almost every task in AOA 2, there's one of the skills elements. It says complete the appropriate checklists. I'm going through it. Engine starting, complete the appropriate checklist. Taxi, complete the appropriate checklist. So completing the appropriate checklist is almost for every task. And then when we get into landings, every landing is going to say complete the appropriate checklist. And I was talking to another examiner the other day. We're seeing a trend, and I don't know if this is national or this is just something that's happening in Houston, but this is multiple flight schools. This isn't just one, where people are using GUMPs as their checklist, and they're not using a checklist. And people, that is just wrong. You have to be in the mindset of using a checklist. Now, I get it. In a 172, especially that's fuel injected, there's not a whole lot on the landing checklist. Maybe landing lights and flaps, and really that if you don't have the flaps down, it's not you're going to land just fine. But you're going to get into bigger airplanes that are going to have props. They're going to have prop controls. They're going to have landing gear. We're going to have cowl flaps. You get in a little bit bigger airplanes. You might have yacht dampers. You got pressurization things that you need to do, fuel pumps. There's really important stuff on those checklists. And to the CFIs out there, if you're going out there and you're not using checklists, you are doing your student a big, big, big disservice. So the basic premise of completing the appropriate checklist, you got to do it. Okay,
you got to have a checklist.
Yeah, you got to have a checklist, and it means don't do it from memory. And I'll take pictures of the lap of the applicant where they've got the checklist open on their lap, but the landing checklist isn't even visible. It's on the back side, and it's probably not going to turn out to their satisfaction, the Checkride, when we're starting to see that. So anyway, just be aware of that. Using the appropriate checklist, you got to use it.
Yep. And I mean, it is an open book test, right? And that might seem like really common sense, but if you and your instructor have landed the last 30 landings without going through the before landing checklist and cleaning up the plane and securing the airplane and not using any of those checklists, you're not going to be any better than that on the day of the check ride, because it's not in your DNA to do that. And as it relates to light gun signals, if you haven't quizzed yourself, if when you fly at night you don't have them demonstrate the light gun signals, then you're not going to know them, and you're only going to be able to memorize them. Runway lighting system, I remember being scared to death of all of the different types of that too, but really that was more instrument training. How much are you dealing with runway lighting systems during the private check ride, Wally?
Not a whole lot. I mean, we do get into the difference in the runway lighting, colors versus taxiway lighting, and that kind of stuff. Of course, we talk about runway incursions, we talk about hot spots, that kind of stuff. But we're not hammering that home significantly. And again, I try to put it within the context of the flight that we're taking, and it makes it easy for an afternoon check ride, because I usually have them plan the cross country to leave at 3 p.m. and maybe they're making a fuel stop, so maybe we are getting to our destination at night. So we'll talk about things like that. I do talk about what does it mean when the rotating beacon is on during the day, and that sort of stuff. So
they need to know their stuff, no question. Task B, traffic patterns. This is one I was giving an orientation this morning at the flight school and talking to people, and I just picked a lesson, which was, I think it was lesson 2 or 3 it was lesson 8 actually. It was a progress check, lesson 8, and the reading material was about the traffic pattern, and I was trying to teach these new 2B students that doing your homework is the best way to save money in flight training. And this particular student didn't have any lessons assigned to their reservation. They were coming in for a progress check, and I know they're going to be challenged on how to enter the traffic pattern at a towered and non-towered airport, and the non-towered airport's going to be the difficult one. And if they didn't read and understand it, they're not going to know it. And the things you need to understand right here are in this ACS: collision hazards, distractions, wake turbulence. Then you have to know right-of-way rules, how to enter the pattern. Like this, I can't stress enough that as we get into more of the technical flying areas, which is where I think students and flight instructors think about the ACS more, the maneuvers, and do I do the maneuvers to maneuver standards? It's more about the knowledge and the rules that are going to incorporate the conversation you're going to have with Wally as it relates to the check ride. True or false, Wally?
Yeah, definitely. And something I would really, speaking of entering the traffic pattern, this is something that I'll occasionally get from an applicant, and until I was really digging into the ACS, I don't know, a year ago or so, was when I realized that the ACS is worded this way. So we have recommended traffic pattern procedures. How do we enter a traffic pattern? Do we just go and enter a right base for runway 18. No, there's certain things that we are supposed to do. Again, it's recommended, not mandatory. It's a non-controlled airport, so it is recommended. However, on the ACS, under the skills section under traffic patterns, it tells us that it says comply with the recommended traffic pattern procedures. So really, for that check ride to be within standard, they have to do the recommended traffic pattern entry procedure. Same with a holding pattern entry on an instrument check ride. It's recommended. What's the recommended procedure for this holding pattern? Okay, it's a teardrop. Well, could you get there another way? Well, you could, but for the check ride, you have to comply with the recommended procedure.
Interesting. Good call out. Which, again, Captain Obvious here, that's in the ACS. If you read the ACS and you know the ACS, you would have known that. It's an open book test. And I'm pretty confident we had someone fail a check ride who did not enter it based on the recommended method recently, and they're going to have to go fly that part of their check ride one more time, and that's a $400 mistake in some cases, right?
Right. Yeah, and that's why when you're doing an instrument approach to an airport, let's say it's a non-controlled airport, and you're flying an RNAV approach, so you're basically doing a straight in. I always recommend that when you're making that call on the CTAF, explain to everybody, XYZ traffic, Cessna 123 Bravo Charlie, on a 6-mile straight in to runway 18 on the RNAV approach. And it kind of lets people know, okay, all right, someone is out there and they're not really playing by the rules, but now we understand why they're not playing by the rules. They're doing a practice instrument approach, and it makes sense.
Yep. Because you would be, if you were in the pattern, you're expecting them to cross midfield or enter the appropriate way.
Yeah.
So now those were two sections or two tasks in Area of Operation 3. Now we jump to Area of Operation 4, and this is where I think, I did. Private pilots is all about takeoff, landings, and go-arounds, and it's a pretty beefy part of what is difficult to be a private pilot student, and there's a lot of information in here. I'm guessing it's 10-plus pages of just this information that, again, will be more of the skills aspect that you're going to fly with them. But, man, there is a lot of meat in this area of operation part here.
So as we're looking at Task A, normal takeoff and climb, go down to the skills element, Bobby. What's the first thing on there?
The first thing in the skills element is complete the appropriate checklists. Yeah.
Guess what? That's on every single takeoff. It's on every single landing as well. Okay. Complete the appropriate checklist, and it's first on the list. Okay, so we got to complete the appropriate checklist. I think this area of operation is a little bit intimidating in that, it's basically the same information for each takeoff. So Task A is normal takeoff and climb. Task B, normal approach and landing. Okay, so C is soft field takeoff. D is going to be soft field landing. So it is, again, a lot of it is the same information repeated over and over again. But, some of the errors that I see a lot is not landing a runway center line. And I'll joke with my applicants. I'll say, as a taxpayer, you pay for the whole runway, not just one side of it. And that's my way of saying, hey, let's land on the center of the runway.
You did a safety meeting. I don't know if you remember this. Not too long ago, you did a safety meeting somewhere in the last 6 months, and you and I kind of came up with a plan to kind of trick the instructors. But the big runway was going to be closed because they were going to repave the left side, I think is what you wanted me to say. And were they aware of that? Note them.
Yeah.
Why would they only repave the left side, Wally?
Well, everybody lands on the left side. We don't ever touch the right side. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of information in the landing, and it's as I'm looking at this, it's almost intimidating. I'm thinking, holy cow, there's a lot of information here. Collision hazards, planning for a rejected landing or go-around, land and hold short operations, effects of crosswind, tailwind, wake turbulence, landing surface conditions. Landing with a tailwind, and that's something that I wish, I've tried to get people, we're in a simulated emergency situation where there's a medical emergency on board our airplane, and the medical emergency is me. I'll tell them I'm having a heart attack, and we might have 3 knots of wind, and by golly, we're not going to land with a tailwind because we just don't do that. And I said, well, could we land with a tailwind? And we'd look up the data. Instead of 640 feet to land, we'd need 780 feet to land on a 5,000-foot long runway. So I think that's something that you instructors should have your student do. A day when it's, the wind is 360 at 5 knots, do a couple landings on runway 18, at an uncontrolled airport. Or even if it's controlled, if there's nobody else in the pattern, ask them, hey, can we land downwind? Do a couple of downwind landings. Just to show them, is it going to feel a little bit different? Yeah, I guess it is, but I think it's something that is good for the toolbox of the students, saying, yeah, okay, I can land with a 5-knot tailwind. And yeah, it's not common practice, but you start flying into bigger airports, and the landing with a tailwind is not uncommon.
Well, I think if you land in San Diego, you only land one way, no matter what, right? I mean, there's some airports that only have one direction of traffic, no matter what you do, and you don't get to pick the way the wind's blowing at that airport for sure.
Absolutely.
So, as it relates to the landings, I think of the Checkride because I'm around a flight school every day, right? Sometimes you guys, meaning you and applicants, might go fly and only be able to do the landings because the ceilings are so low, or something is accomplishable and some things aren't accomplishable. But do you incorporate these as part of the flight? I'm assuming you don't just go to the pattern normally and just do the 3 types of landings and then the 3 types of takeoffs and the 3 types of landings. I'm assuming you break that up as part of the flight as well. We're leaving normally, and we're coming back with a soft field or a short field or something to that effect. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I will usually have the first takeoff be some sort of a performance takeoff. It'll either be a short field or a soft field takeoff, the first takeoff out of the box. And, I'll tell in the pre-flight briefing, okay, our first takeoff is going to be a soft field takeoff. And I'll say to the applicant, look, I'll remind you of this again in the run-up area. I'll remind you again before we're ready for takeoff. So, I mean, if you forget it, it's no big deal. But I'll normally do something like that right out of the box. I try to do the specialty landings. I try to set the applicant up for a success and do those landings as part of a traffic pattern. In other words, we're not going to come in from the practice area and go right into a short field landing. Although you could. I mean, it's well within my right to do that, but most short field landings are going to be within the traffic pattern.
So let's assume we're successful in the landing components, and we've done good in all of these different types. Obviously, there's acronyms in the ACS, and we really start seeing it more here, where we might be flying a specific type of aircraft that requires things and there's sections that don't apply to us. In this case, glassy water, rough water, those are only used for airplane single engine C or multi-engine C, and that's probably not what you do on a very regular basis, Wally.
Right.
So we can just skip all those areas or tasks that don't apply to our type of aircraft, i.e. C in this case, right? So huge section of the ACS gets pulled out because we're not flying that type of a plane. But then we get to area of operation 5, and I hate it, but I really believe this is where people start reading the ACS.
Yeah,
I think
let me
go ahead.
Let me go back to landings. When as you're going through the ACS and you start seeing all this seaplane stuff, it's real easy to say, oh, I mean, 'cause I'm looking at it right now. Task G, confined area takeoff, airplane single engine C. Okay. Confined area landing. Okay. Glassy water takeoff. Okay, I don't need any of this stuff. But hidden back here,
Oh, I see
task,
it. Task M.
Task M is a forward slip to a landing. So that is part of the private. And task N is in November, is a go-around. So don't get to that seaplane stuff and say I'm done and just jump to the next one. There are 2 more tasks that we got to cover.
Shame on me, because that's what I was doing. I was just skipping it all. I was skimming fast to try and keep in our window of time for this podcast, and I really did skip them. Forward slip is one thing I don't like because I'm close to the ground and it feels a little abnormal. So we don't want to skip those 2 components for sure. I try to speak about it all the time. Go around or unable are the 2 best things that a pilot has in their toolbox. So make sure you don't miss those 2 tasks as well.
Yeah, I had to do a go around 2 days ago on a 777 coming into Maui. We were turning base to final, and a little Cessna Caravan was kind of in our way.
Wow.
And they said it wasn't a traditional go-around. It was abandon the approach, maintain present altitude, and fly heading 020. And then we climbed up to 6,000, came back and did it again. So, go-arounds happen. They happen at all different places within the approach. And
think that guy or girl knows how much money that costs United?
Oh, I don't know. We were watching. We're going, who is this? What's going on here? And we're thinking this isn't going to work. And about that time, I think the controller said, this isn't going to work. But anyway, that's all right. I think we were about 45 minutes early, so we landed about 35 minutes early. So
awesome. So back to Area Operation 5, performance maneuvers and ground reference maneuvers. This is probably where I remember my flight instructor showing me the PTS in those days, the ACS now. Like, this is where I'm afraid people spend their time. And we are more than halfway through the ACS now. And if you skip the first half, you're going to struggle on your check ride. But these maneuvers are where we think about the ACS more, right? Can I fly to these skill level standards? But this is a small component, and I don't know if you have the statistics, but out of all the check rides you've done, 4 digits, thousands of check rides, are check rides normally failed on these performance maneuvers or somewhere else? It's just one or the other, A or B, performance maneuvers or somewhere else?
Somewhere else.
Yeah. And it's because we spend all of our time here and we don't spend all of our time in the other places.
Right.
It's not about flying as much as it is the knowledge. And I'm going to keep saying that till the day I die, but we have to stay focused on other things. But here we are. We've got the steep turns. We've got ground reference maneuvers. And it's all about 100 feet and 10 knots, 10 plus or minus 10 here and there, right? But I think I hear more people not setting up correctly for ground reference maneuvers. When you're out there, I'm assuming you do high work and then low work. Is that your normal MO?
Yeah. Typically, we're going to head out on a cross country. We're going to cover all the cross country elements, which is later on in the ACS. At some point, it for the configuration of the airports that I usually fly out of, it's usually more advantageous for everybody to go do the landings at a airport other than the airport that we took off from, just from a control standpoint and traffic standpoint. So, we'll end up at another airport. We'll do all the landings. Then we'll take off. We'll go up high. We'll do the instrument work. We'll do the high maneuvers, maybe an emergency descent down to a lower altitude. We might lose an engine to do an emergency landing, and then out of that, we'll do the ground reference maneuvers and come back home. That's it. I mean, I'm not mentioning everything. There's some other things in there, but in a nutshell, that's how it works. Now, are there times where we're ready to go and we've got weather conditions that might be, 2,000 broken, and but it's clearing. The weather's clearing. We think that in an hour we're going to have 3,500 scattered. So might there be a situation where we start out in the traffic pattern and do all the landings for the first 40 minutes or so? Yeah, we can do that. So everything there, we just got to be flexible with everything.
I think I hear students, again, back the ground reference maneuver stuff. Do they normally have the information they need in their brain, like the altitude that they're supposed to do these maneuvers at? Do you find people not having that as something they're ready to do? I hear about people picking the wrong altitude at times. Just curious, what's the common errors as it relates to Area of Operation 5, steep turns and ground reference maneuvers?
Steep turns, I can tell a lot about a pilot by doing steep turns. A pilot that can nail their steep turns, that's a big feather in their cap. If they just come in and nail the steep turns, I'm pretty impressed. And I will say that because I'm a person who, I couldn't do steep turns probably till I was a CFI. I struggled with them. I really struggled with them. And what I've learned, I've watched thousands of steep turns now. One thing that I find is that the applicant is inside the airplane way too much. Steep turns is a visual maneuver. You ought to be outside the airplane, put the nose on the horizon and turn it. And that's basically the end of it. And when I've instructed, when I've had people struggle with steep turns, I just take my iPad, which I have on my lap, I'll take it and I will cover up the entire instrument panel. I'll say, okay, now do a steep turn. And I'll let them use the attitude indicator to establish the appropriate bank angle, whether it be 45 or more for a commercial. And then I'll cover everything up. And, 360 degrees later, I take it down and they look at their altitude and they are right on it. Right, I have never had anybody not be able to do a steep turn when I cover up the instruments, and so it just goes to show you that maybe looking inside isn't the thing that we need to do. We need to be outside. The other thing about a steep turn is, for private, it's a 45-degree bank. So what a lot of times you'll see is the applicant rolls into the bank, they begin to lose altitude. So what do? They decrease the bank. So now we've done half of this steep turn at 30 degrees. Well, that's not a steep turn. So we have not accomplished the maneuver. So, that's something to be aware of.
Is there a common error with ground reference maneuvers?
I would say the common error in ground reference maneuvers is inappropriate altitudes.
Right.
I have done many ground reference. I say, okay, and I will not tell the applicant what altitude to go to. I will typically do this maneuver after we've done the emergency landing. Of course, we're not going to land, but.
Right.
We set up for a emergency landing. I'll tell them to go around, and I'll say, okay, let's fly to the appropriate altitude for ground reference maneuvers. And I've had some go up to 1,500 feet. And say, okay, let's find something and do a turnabout a point or S-turns or whatever. And we're doing it at 1,500 feet. And, it the disapproval says inappropriate.
Those don't end well.
Yeah, inappropriate altitude for ground reference maneuvers. And they will usually play the safety card. Oh, my instructor says we should do it at this altitude because it's safer. Well, okay, maybe it's safer, but it's not the standard. The standard says 600 to 1,000 feet AGL. It works out in Houston. We're our airports are 150 to 250 feet MSL, so it works out for us if we just set the altimeter to 1,000 feet. We're at about 850, 950 feet, something like that, and it works real well for us in Houston. Now people at other places, you gotta do the math, but it does say 600 to 1,000 feet AGL.
Yeah, there's still a lot of meat left on this bone, so let's try and hustle through some of this. The navigation stuff I remember from me was pretty simple. I think it's because we spend so much time on our solo cross countries and trying to use in Houston fly following, and we're kind of familiar with that stuff. I think the diversion throws some people off. Wally, you've done more check rides than me. Was the diversion the navigation problem in the check ride, or is there something else related to lost procedures or pilotage and dead reckoning?
The pilotage and dead reckoning is sometimes an issue, and what I try to, when I'm instructing, what I tell the people is that the distance to the first point, or the time to the first point, is very, I'm not going to say irrelevant, but it's going to be you may be off to your first point based on, I was expecting to take off on runway X and we took off on runway Y, or ATC had us fly runway heading for 5 miles. So that time to that first point is almost irrelevant. So now from the first point to the second point, now we're locking in and we should be on course. So I say make that first point pretty close to your departure airport, within 5 miles. And then your next point maybe 6-8 miles down the road from there. So yeah, and again, when ATC has you do things that you weren't expecting, you take off to the south and you're going to the northwest, but they want you to make a left downwind departure rather than a right downwind departure. You weren't expecting that. So that time to that first waypoint or that first checkpoint isn't going to be very accurate in that case. So yeah, I do see the errors in that. People finding, looking at, picking points that aren't very good points to pick. Private airports, I think, are not usually very good unless you're very familiar with it, because it's normally just a piece of grass. Mm-hmm. Bodies of water can be tricky because if you're in a drought situation, the bodies of water aren't there. If you're in a flood situation, the bodies of water don't look like what they look like on the sectional. Now, if we're talking about like the Mississippi River, that's a different deal, but little ponds and that kind of stuff are kind of tough.
So assuming we get through navigation and all that stuff, now we're into the high, really what I would call the high maneuvers, slow flight, power on stalls, power off stalls. I'm assuming this is where we spend a lot of our time with our instructors. And we'll do well in those maneuvers in general. If you have a big gotcha, please share it. But how do you find, the big question for me is the spin awareness component, right? How are students describing that to you, or how good are they at being prepared to talk about spin awareness?
Well, we talk about that in the stall, entering the stalls, and I'd say by and large the students are pretty good at keeping the airplane coordinated. As long as it's coordinated, the chances of getting in a spin are probably not going to happen. But it's when you're raising that nose and you're keeping it out of coordination. So I think by and large the instructors do a pretty good job on that. My complaint that I have more than anything else on the power on stalls is I see very, very, very aggressive pitch ups to slow the airplane down. And I think as an instructor, when we're teaching this maneuver, we just have to have a little bit more patience and let them raise the nose at a normal rate of raising the pitch. Because what's a power on stall all about? We are simulating basically taking off and the airplane and getting behind the airplane, and the nose gets too high and we run out of airspeed. Well, when we do these aggressive pitch ups, that's not. I don't. We're not learning power on stalls to pass a check ride. We're learning power on stalls to keep us alive. And so let's kind of simulate what we would really do. I hope that makes sense. But these aggressive pitch ups where we're just yanking the airplane back, there's nothing that feels right about that. And so I would
like
prefer
this section of the ACS under spin awareness. I like that the skills section says applicant exhibits the skill to intentionally left blank, so that we're not trying to go out there and do a stall, demonstrate a stall. It's more of a knowledge component for sure. One of the sections, area of operations, now we're at area operation 8, basic instrument maneuvers. I can remember this being an overwhelming component of my training, right? VOR navigation was not natural for me. I definitely practiced it a lot, but I wasn't very good at it. But you mentioned straight and level on the last episode being kind of an issue for even instrument students. The unusual attitudes were scary for me because I just didn't feel in control. Private students get such a small bite of this stuff. How do you rate on a scale of 1 to 10 the average private student as it relates to area of operation 8 basic instrument maneuvers?
I'd say pretty good.
Yeah.
Pretty good. I do like, when I look in an applicant's logbook, I do like to see little spatterings of instrument time. It's just technique. I think when I see someone that went out and flew for 4 hours and got 3 hours of instrument time in one day, I think that's not very good, because first of all, flying under the hood or flying with foggles on is very fatiguing, I believe, and especially for a student pilot who's working on their private. So I think 3/10 at a time, 4/10, 2/10. I think, that's the way my instructor did it with me, and that's the way I always did it with my students is, okay, let's just throw in a little bit of this on the way out to the practice area and, mix it up that way. That seems to be better. I hate it when I see instrument time on their night cross country. It meets the requirements, but when we take away all their, we're not looking outside. It's like, well, okay, why are we doing a night cross country? Well, we've just taken away part of that. So it can be done, and it's legal, but I don't think it's the best interest of the student to do that. But yeah, just straight and level. We'll usually be climbing up, and I'll say, okay, let's put the view limiting device on, and I'll just have them level off. Okay, let's level off at 2,000 feet. And a lot of times they look over at me like, okay, what now? And I go, well, we're just flying straight and level. Let's see how that goes as we're gaining and gaining and gaining and gaining altitude. Maybe.
Yeah.
But down there under our risk management is trimming the aircraft. So straight and level. It's all about trimming the airplane.
Yeah, I don't remember I remember trimming being hard, but once I figured that out, I don't remember obviously it being that difficult. I don't think instrument flying was easy because of for me the navigation, the VOR stuff. Until I got my instrument rating and things clicked, I really didn't do a great job in hating unusual attitudes, because I think my instructors were extremely aggressive. Also made that pretty unpleasant until I decided to get my instrument rating. And there's more stuff left, but we're at the end of the ACS for all intents and purposes. We're to emergency procedures, and I think much like parallel parking for driving, we spend so much time practicing the engine out procedures, the emergency procedures as a CFI and a student. I would assume a lot of this is pretty good, except maybe not picking the best spot or aligning themselves with winds. What's some of the common errors as we wrap up on emergency procedures, Wally?
Well, one common error is when I ask the applicant for an emergency descent, they think it's an emergency landing. And these are two different maneuvers. Emergency descent is, we're up at 5,500 feet, and we need to get down. Now, granted, in most of these airplanes, when I think of an emergency descent, I think I'm in a pressurized airplane at 36,000 feet, and we just lost pressurization, and we need to get down to 10,000 feet. So we need to lose 26,000 feet in a hurry. The engines are running. Everything's fine. We got an electrical system. Everything's good. We just need to get the airplane down so that we can breathe. So that is a maneuver, an emergency descent. So, and it says it right here, under the skills, all the, use bank between 30 and 45 to maintain positive load factors during the descent, maintain appropriate airspeed. If we need to get down in a hurry, we need to get down. Again, I just think emergency descent and emergency approach and landing are they're confused, because I say let's do an emergency descent down to 2,000 feet, and people start going through the mixture rich, fuel selector on, fuel pump on, magnetos on, attempt to restart. No, I'm not doing that. We're doing an emergency descent. The engine's just fine. So we see that, and then the emergency approach and landing. Sometimes we don't pick good spots. I had a applicant the other day, and we were landing. We were setting up for a landing, and my comment to him was, "Are we going over or are we going under the power lines?" And he said, "We're going to go under the power lines." And I said, "Do you think that's a good idea?" And anyway, so we'll see what he chooses next time, if you catch my drift. Yeah. And then there's systems malfunctions. Again, I talk a lot about electrical failures. Everybody knows that. So if we're in a Cessna, we very possibly are going to do a no-flap approach and landing. And then we're supposed to talk about their emergency equipment and survival gear, which that is usually covered during the brief. Most students will, or applicants will, talk to me about the, we have a fire extinguisher in most of these airplanes, and that's really it.
Well, we've spent almost 3 hours talking about all this stuff in the ACS, and I would doubt many people spend that many hours in the ACS when they're preparing for their check rides. So it's been a great conversation. If you're going to be a private applicant anytime in the future, you should really re-listen to all 3 of these episodes and make sure you read the ACS, understand the ACS. It is the guide to your open book check ride with Wally or any other DP for that matter. And you should be very successful.
Yeah, and I would say don't take these 3 episodes as you're going through the ACS, because we really rushed through it. We did.
For sure.
This is the Cliff's Notes version. You need to read this. I mean, there are many times where I've said to an applicant, I said, "Have you ever seen the ACS?" And I've had, I think I saw my instructor had a copy of it. I'm going, oh boy, that's usually not a recipe for a good outcome.
And it's a free document. It's a free document.
Yeah.
You can download it on the internet. Search ACS, private ACS, FAA. You'll find it for sure.
Yeah.
Wally, it's been fun doing these 3 episodes. I love revisiting all these important details that I don't think about on a daily basis myself. Appreciate your time. And for all the listeners out there, thanks for listening. And enjoy your flying. Fly safely and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.